we have Colonel Ann McClain and Major Nichole Ayers aboard the International Space Station, and we have some questions to ask. So let me first ask, what projects or research are you currently working on aboard the International Space Station that we should know about?
Man, that's a great question to kick this off. You know, at any given point here on the space station, there are over 200 science experiments going on, both inside and outside of the space station. You know, there's a lot of human research that goes on board the International Space Station, and it's actually volunteer only. So we volunteer for the human research that happens up here. Ann's part of a study called CIPHER that looks at long-term effects of space microgravity and radiation on the body, and it's looking at a bunch of, it's actually combining probably 30 plus different studies to look at the body and how it adapts to microgravity. I'm also a part of several studies that look at bone and muscle loss, looking at cardiovascular systems, eyeballs, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of human science that goes on up here, but one of the projects that I'm really excited about, and we've been doing a lot of recently, is actually Earth photography, specifically transient luminous events, or the electrical activity that happens above the clouds over thunderstorms. You know, the International Space Station has a unique vantage point that we actually get to see those TLEs, or transient luminous events. And they're pretty rare to begin with. They're even more rare to capture on a camera. And so we've been trying our hardest to capture both oblique shots of them so you can see the events above the clouds, but then also looking straight nadir, we have that other point of view, looking straight down on top of the clouds to see how the lightning moves. It can really inform scientists and researchers about the upper atmosphere, about the thunderstorms, and about those TLEs and how they interact and what those characteristics are. So a lot of exciting science that happens up here.
Very cool. So how about the research you're doing? How is it bringing tangible benefits back to the Earth? That's a question I hear on the Hill quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Really, everything that we do aboard the International Space Station is within the NASA motto of "for the benefit of all." We work with multiple different space agencies, organizations, educational institutions, research centers from around the world to bring to maximize the benefit of science on station. So if you or someone you know has been treated for cancer, Parkinson's, muscular dystrophy, heart disease, or osteoporosis, then space station research has directly impacted them. We also collect and distribute data on oceans, weather patterns, forestry, and vegetation, directly contributing to our ability to manage those natural resources. In fact, my family has a forest company, and we use data that comes from an instrument called JEDI on the outside of Space Station that can kind of map forests and, well, all land really, kind of in a 3D to give better indications for forest management. And instruments outside of the space station have also advanced our knowledge of pulsars and black holes and given us insights into the origin of our solar system like never before. But I think if you could ask what a tangible benefit is, I'd really encourage everybody to look at some of the research on protein crystal growth that we do here. Over 500 experiments have been done, actually more by now, on protein crystal growth. It has directly contributed to disease research. It is by far the highest amount of a single type of research that we've done on the International Space Station. And the diseases and kind of human biology that I mentioned, those are where really a lot of the direct results come from. And one that I'll point out is Keytruda, the immunotherapy drug for cancer. The treatment today is vastly different than 10 years ago, and that is a direct result of research done on the International Space Station.
Awesome, great. So later this year, the space station will pass 25 years of continuous human presence in an orbiting laboratory. Can you describe why that's an important milestone for us all to consider?
Yeah, you know, I think as humans, we naturally want to explore. And so the International Space Station and our presence in low Earth orbit is an example of that. You know, we have plenty of people who remember the moon landing, but we have adults all across the world who only remember a world where people lived in space. And I think that's important because of all of the different types of lessons learned that we've gained on the International Space Station and all of the science. You know, I think the legacy of the International Space Station will be the knowledge and the lessons learned that we carry through onto the moon and onto Mars as we build the Artemis program. And I think that, as Ann pointed out, all of the benefits that we've gained in the research that we've done here, we will just take all of those lessons learned onto the moon, continue to learn how humans will live in space, and continue to learn about the Earth. We're going to learn so much about the Earth when we get to the moon and when we move on to Mars. And so I think that the legacy of the International Space Station is really creating that foundation to explore the universe further.
So what has surprised you most about how humans adapt physically and operationally to long-duration spaceflight?
I tell you, it surprises me just how well we adapt to any environment that we're in. We talk. A lot of people say, do you get sick, or does your body hurt when you go to space or when you go back to Earth? And I think, on my first space flight, I was 39 years old. And I'm not the first human to live on Earth. I come from a long line of thousands of years of humans on Earth that have all developed, our bodies have developed on Earth in 1G. That's how we work. Then I personally was on Earth for 39 years. My body got used to gravity. And then I launch up to the International Space Station to completely take away gravity. And worst case scenario, I think crew members are maybe sick for a few days. That is phenomenal when you think about it. Most airplanes that fly around with these big complex engines, if you take away gravity, there's a lot of the systems that would break. And somehow our body just goes, okay, well, this is our new normal, and it adapts. So that's one of our physical adaptations, but also mental adaptations. We live and work together, and we kind of have a common culture among astronauts here. It's a weird one. If you came and visited for a day, you'd probably look at us funny at some of the things that we do. But it's just kind of the way we work. And we work across all ground cultures. So we have 3 countries represented right now. We recently had a visiting crew that brought it up to 6 countries around the world represented here, and we still had that common culture. So I think what has really surprised me and humbled me and actually made me very excited and optimistic about being a human is how well we can adapt and how well we can work with each other.
Great. You mentioned, you kind of referred to the Ax-4 crew, and that marked another important step in commercial human spaceflight and accessing the International Space Station. How was your experience working with the Ax-4 crew, and what did NASA learn from the international cooperation and commercial collaboration?
Yeah, I think the Axiom 4 crew was an amazing experience for us. We had a very busy first half of our mission, and then right as things started to slow down, the Axiom 4 crew showed up, and it was great timing. We were able to do a lot of work with them and watch how they work. It was really motivational to see them work. The Ax-4 crew had Peggy Whitson, a retired NASA astronaut, and then had 3 different astronauts from different countries, and they're all selected by their country to be here. And so the motivation was incredible to see. The preparation that they put into their mission was incredible. They showed up, and on day 1, they were executing science and research and moving things. And, on day 1, for most of us, when we have a long duration mission, we can kind of, get our bearings and settle into the space station, and they hit the ground running, or hit the space station floating, if you will. And so it was really incredible to watch them work. But also, they brought a ton of science. That Crew Dragon also brings cargo, and so they bring a ton of science on board the International Space Station. And then they also took a bunch of cargo home, and that's kind of the segue into the commercialization of spaceflight. They actually took samples home for NASA, and so NASA's commercial strategy is really to get more commercial companies involved in low Earth orbit, get more countries involved in low Earth orbit. It'll make the services cheaper for NASA, and that'll allow us to continue on with the Artemis program and really build off out onto the moon and onto Mars. And so I think that the commercial cooperation is incredibly beneficial, and watching the Axiom crew was just another part of that.
Awesome. Great answer. Completely agree. So from time to time, there are technical issues. How do you all handle unexpected technical issues that pop up from time to time?
Yeah, they come up a lot, and it's every day is kind of hey, what system are we going to learn really in depth right now that we didn't know existed 2 days ago? Yeah. We really handle those as a team. We are up here. We're the eyes and ears and hands of mission control, but the technical experts are on the ground. So it's a little bit of a strange setup. We kind of are the top level operators where we can safe a system. We can recognize when a system is in an off-nominal condition. We can fix most systems with a procedure, but really the brains behind the brawn is in mission control and all the teams that support mission control. And so, we had a system today that has an off-nominal current signature, and we've got a lot of people on the ground working on that. And, we're kind of feeding them information. They feed us procedures. So it's kind of an iterative process. But solving problems and managing risk, I think, are two of what NASA does the best. That is our irreplaceable skill that I think NASA has, and what we share with commercial companies and other countries when we work with them is actually NASA's structured approach to solving problems with a system of checks and balances, making sure that not only do we fix a problem, but we get back to 2 or 3 fault tolerant on every system so that we can continue flight.
Awesome, great answer. We have in the room here today and at the conference roughly 2,000 to 3,000 engineers, aerospace and space engineers. So hearing how you are handling that is obviously music to their ears. In your view, as we plan to sort of move on to the moon and Mars, how is the ISS preparing us for those sort of deep space missions coming up?
Yeah, so the moon and Mars are definitely tough problems to solve. It's going to take a lot of people and a lot of brains, a lot of engineering minds to get us there. We have to solve, how do humans do long-term spaceflight? How do we do less resupply emissions because we're not in low Earth orbit and we're further away? How do we do less comm with the ground? Anne talked about the iterative process that we've been going through today. How do we do maintenance without that process? How do we do food and water, and how do we recycle everything that we use? We have to get to a point where we're recycling 98 to 99% of our water use just in order to get to the moon and onto Mars. And so all of those things are being tested here on the International Space Station, and it's a great test bed where we do have the opportunity to talk to the ground and get the resupply missions and do the iterative process and figure out how we're going to make those things work when we get further away from the Earth. So the space station, like I said, it's a big knowledge bed. We've been providing those lessons learned for 25 plus years, and we're going to continue to do that all the way through 2030 in order to inform how we get to the moon and Mars.
So, Colonel, you mentioned the space station is obviously slated to remain in service through 2030. Over the next 5 years or so, what types of research or tech demos do you think could have profound impacts on life here on Earth or beyond?
Yeah, and I might sound like a little bit like a broken record, but the protein crystals is really probably the thing that sticks out to me as having the largest single tangible benefit to human health on Earth. As far as other research in the next 5 or 6 years, it kind of gives me heart palpitations thinking about how much research we need to fit into that time. Nichole just talked about future exploration, and I see there's a lot of unknowns with these future missions, and what we need to do here on Space Station is reduce those to at least known unknowns. It seems like every time we solve a problem, we get 6 more questions, or we learn about a piece of equipment, we test a piece of equipment on the ground, we bring it to Space Station, and it just somehow works a little bit differently and a little bit different than expected. And so I think we have a really cool opportunity to have this platform while we are conducting the first Artemis missions. And we have an opportunity to send astronauts and equipment that have flown to Space Station on those deeper space exploration missions. So I think that the technologies we can test as much technology as we possibly can while we still have Space Station.
Makes sense. And this is your second spaceflight mission to the ISS. How have things evolved from your first mission back in 2019?
Yeah, it's been interesting. This is an incredible research platform, but it also means that it's an incredible learning platform. So we get a snapshot of 6 months every time we're here, and during those missions, you see something that we've done that we've been doing for a long time, and you see other things that we're doing for the first time. So I think what's been really interesting for me is that some of the things that we were trying to do for the first time in 2019 have really been matured, developed, and come to fruition here in 2025. So some of the life science experiments that we've been doing in glove boxes, some of our robotic experiments, right to the right of Nichole over here, you see some Astro Bee, little flying robots. I actually deployed those in 2019, and since then they've done hundreds of runs with them, looking at little robotic arms that can grapple moving satellites. We're looking at robotic refueling missions and things like that. And so I think what I'm incredibly excited about is seeing not only what questions Space Station has answered, but how they are building on what we're learning every single year and asking more complex questions and coming up with more complex solutions.
Okay, great. Nichole, this is your first mission to the space station. What's something unexpected that happened during this mission?
Oh man, I think there's a lot that's kind of unexpected. You talk to former astronauts, you talk to, your commander of the Crew Dragon about their experience, and you kind of get everybody's experience, but you can only live it for yourself. And I think one of those instances was the view. Everybody talks about the overview effect, and it hits everybody differently, but it has been phenomenal to see the Earth from this point of view and to see just all of the different, I've been learning geography by geology. By the continents look different based on their color and their texture and the terrain and, the ocean and the way that the ocean colors are. And so there are so many different things to learn about the Earth. It's just a great reminder when we look out the window, we can see the entire Earth. And so it's such a small, fragile blue marble, and it's a good reminder that we need to take really good care of it. And one of the other things that I've been looking a lot at, we just flew over Greece and saw some of the fires that were there from here. And so trying to help inform how we do life on Earth by taking pictures of things that could help people recover from things like fires or other natural disasters, floods, earthquakes. We've been constantly trying to capture as much as we possibly can and feed that back to the Earth to help everybody work as one human race to solve the problems.
Awesome. All right, so I have the CEO of Axiom coming on stage after y'all. In your view, how do private astronauts enhance or complement the work that government crews do on the ISS?
I think the private astronaut missions are the natural progression of spaceflight. If you look over the history of NASA, that's exactly what NASA is meant to do. It's to enable not only commercial spaceflight, but other countries. So it harkens back to our days when we were the Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, NACA. And the government said, hey, NACA, figure out how to fly these airplanes, right? And so NACA at the time built a lot of wind tunnels, and they did a lot of testing, and they coded airfoils, and they created a database of what size airfoils create what kind of lift, et cetera, all wind tunnel tested. We've got still have some of the best wind tunnels in the world in NASA facilities. So NASA is meant to provide a service. So recently, well, not super recently, but within the last 15, 20 years, Congress has said, hey, NASA, enable commercial spaceflight. So that is what NASA is doing right now. How do we do that? We don't need to build the big wind tunnels, but bringing these private astronaut missions aboard the International Space Station has been absolutely pivotal to creating not only, it kind of creates access for people that didn't have access prior. So Nichole mentioned that this last Axiom 4 mission had astronauts from 3 countries that have not previously participated in this manner in spaceflight. And each one of those astronauts were a professional astronaut selected by their country, by their agencies, with the intent of building their space program. So I think that single mission may have had one of the biggest impacts on the next 5 years of spaceflight than anything we've seen, especially here in low Earth orbit. And so companies like Axiom, like a lot of our other private companies that are getting into low Earth orbit, have really been enabled by the NASA research. The lessons that we learn at NASA are open to share to everybody. They are not proprietary, they're not secret. And as soon as a commercial company can come into the space that NASA's operating in, that's when we have to move out and explore further. NASA, by definition, does not compete with, we are a government agency. We do not compete with the commercial sector. We complement it. And then once the commercial sector can fill in that space is when we move further into exploration. So that's how you'll see that we're going to pass on all these lessons to as many people as will listen, as NASA, with tax dollars for the greater good, provides the service of, okay, now what else is out there that commercial companies can't do yet? Where can we explore?
Awesome. I think we hit our time limit here. Colonel McClain, Major Ayers, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for taking the time. It's been great to talk to you, and hello to all of the engineers.
All right, thanks.
Station, this is Houston ACR, and that concludes the event.
That's great. Okay. Giving this a minute just to make sure I don't miss anything. All right. Okay, well, I think that worked out extremely well. If anybody got a photo of me and the astronauts at the same time, please send that to me. I want to send it to my kids. They will not believe me. So changing gears here for a moment, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, keynote interview this morning. We have Tejpaul Bhatia, the recently new CEO of Axiom Space, joining us. I'm not going to go through Tej's bio. It would take us quite a bit of time here. Just looking at his LinkedIn profile makes me feel like I haven't done enough in my life already. But at least he's probably a couple years older than me, so I still have time. But Tejpaul has been with Axiom just about a year now, 4 months, 4 years. Sorry, CEO though. CEO is relatively new. So rather than me step on this a little bit, why don't we welcome Tejpaul Bhatia to the stage?
That was pretty cool.
That's very cool. So I was doing some research on you, sir, and I saw a great way of describing you that was written in an article recently. It said, "The Googler who came to monetize space."
All right.
Talk to us about that. Why in the world did you come to space from Google?
So I remember that article. It was in TechCrunch. And for the startup founders in here, I was a startup founder for 10 years, and your dream is to get a headline on TechCrunch for your startup. That put a lot of pressure on me.
I bet it did.
That was a little over 4 years ago that article came out. I was at Google for 4 years. I was a startup founder for many years. And I've been passionate about space, dreaming about it since I was 3 years old. And I hit a point in my life where I was like, okay, enough dreaming. I want to do something about this.
Yeah.
So I met with a friend of mine who's an angel investor. And I started the meeting with, I'm obsessed with space, but I'm not a rocket scientist and I'm not a billionaire. So what can I do?
Right.
And this guy's known me for a while. He's like, you're not a type of person to start with what you're not. But yeah, you're not a rocket scientist, you're not a billionaire, but there's a lot of white space in between there. And people need your help. So I started looking at the startup market, the ecosystem, while I was at Google and started helping out a couple of founders. And that's when I met Axiom Space. And I ended up making an angel investment in the company a little over 5 years ago.
Awesome. Yeah. I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah. So you've been at Citi.
Notice I didn't answer how I'm going to monetize.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So you've been at Citi, you've been Google, you've been what's called a startup ecosystem manager at Google. You were the entrepreneur in residence at Citi. How did that prepare you for Axiom and for space? What did you learn from the entrepreneurs that you spent time with, or the founders you spent time with? What were you able to sort of bring to Axiom and to the space industry, and what has, to some extent, I think it's interesting. What are the challenges that some of those founders were dealing with here on Earth that have really nothing to do with the challenges you face at Axiom as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The reason I was at Citi Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence, and the reason I was at Google was because of my 10 years as a startup founder. Yeah. So I started 3 companies of my own. All 3 were investor backed. All 3 saw significant scale. 2 we sold and 1 we shut down. And the real story of why I stopped, 10 years in, almost exactly 10 years in, my wife and I found out we were pregnant. She was pregnant. I had something to do with it. But,
yeah, exactly.
And kind of it hit me and I was like, wow, I don't want to do this anymore, right? Being a startup founder. My wife was super supportive, but it took all of me. Mm-hmm. And now we're bringing another life onto the planet, and it's not fair for me not to try to be a normal dad. Mm-hmm. I realize I'm not even close to being a normal dad, even if I have a normal job and all that stuff. And I think my son loves me for it. But I had actually said when I left my last startup, I told my co-founder, I have some good news and bad news. Good news is I'm going to be a dad. Bad news is I'm out of this game. I'm never going to be a founder again. I'm never going to go to startups again. Yeah. And I'm also not a person who ever says never. And here I am at a startup, again, 4 years later. I'm not a founder of the company, but as CEO, I see myself as a founder mode CEO. And we'll talk about what founder mode means. But to your question, why Citi brought me in, why Google brought me in was this concept of founder empathy. It's really hard to know what a startup founder goes through unless you're going through it. Are there startup founders in the room right now?
Quite a few hands.
Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. How are you feeling?
And would you do it again?
It's really hard to know, right? Like it's until you're in it, until you've had the responsibility of other families' livelihoods, right? That knowing that you got to make the next payroll, you don't have a business model, you're running out of runway, you're raising money. Some will say that builds character. I think it just proves you're insane. But the world needs you, right? Otherwise, we don't make progress. So for me, it was really about, it wasn't about coaching, I'd say, but I was like, okay, I've learned something. Maybe I can share that. And when I left the startup world, I had a hard time finding a job. I kept getting pigeonholed as like the VP of product or VP of biz dev. And in my startup world, I was both, but neither. I was a founder.
Everything.
But it's not like you're going to go to Google or Amazon and be like, all right, make me founder, right? Like that just like it doesn't work, and you don't fit into a normal profile for a recruiter. So you're kind of this square peg in a round hole. So it's very hard to find a job, a normal job. Entrepreneur residence at Citi, startup ecosystem manager at Google, and then it just was a platform for me to support other founders. And what I learned about space is space founders are no different. You're creating a new company, and you're learning. And sorry, for the founders who raise their hand, how many of you are first-time founders? How are you feeling? Good. Wait till the second and third one. It gets better and it gets worse. What I said is I was a first-time founder, all three startups. And then when I met the space founders, I realized two things. One is they're going through that same journey, that their unique version of that journey as startup founders, and it's very lonely and it's very hard. So having that community and that support is valuable.
You said you met space founders in those previous roles?
Yeah. I over-indexed my work a little bit to work with space founders. My boss at Google at one point, when we measured everything, and AI and blockchain were kind of more what you would think I would be focusing on. Maybe like 20% of my portfolio was space. And he's like, this math doesn't add up. And I was like, I'm just a huge space nut. And he was like, me too. So he's like, let's lean in, let's see how we can help these founders. So it was really good on the Google platform. And then the second part that I learned is space founders, and this is all founders, very rarely understand the venture capital math.
Okay.
Which is venture capitalists need to make money, right? They raise money from other people, and they only make money when they make that money back plus a profit. So when they're making bets, they're much more likely to place bets on a startup that has much lower odds of success, but much higher return. Because they're expecting 9 out of 10 startups to fail. Actually, they're expecting more than 9 out of 10. So they need a one that succeeds to be the next Google, Amazon, Microsoft, NVIDIA. So I think a lot of founders in general don't get this, and you don't really learn this till you're on the other side, on the investing side. And then space founders don't get it for a second reason, where venture capital thinks in terms of 7 to 10 years horizon. They need to show a rate of return in that time, otherwise they're not going to raise their second fund.
Right.
And space timelines tend to be longer than that. And it's not a question of changing one or the other, it's a question of the founder being able to sell their product and vision to meet the needs of those investors.
That's fair. I mean, I don't know if they asked me to interview you because I also have experience as a founder and going through the fundraising process and having to to fight through that for year after year after year. And I thought it was interesting. Somebody told me at one point, Tej, early on, it's, hey, 9 out of 10 startups fail, right? I don't know if that's an accurate number, but it doesn't surprise me. But they said that's not the story. The story is that 1 out of 10 that succeeds, there's another 80% of those that are succeeding that are just growing this much every year. They're growing just 5% more, 10% more, and they're keeping that founder and that team, like they're chasing a target that's just moving a little bit. Oh man, we can get there, we can get there, we can get there. And those are the ones where it's like they're probably never going to hit exit velocity, but they keep going for a while. That's the mode I found myself in as a founder.
When I was at Google, we did a lot of studies on this statistical, and you define, let's say define success that your investors made money more than they would have made in the stock market.
Okay.
Right? So that's how success is defined. If you look, and then just say any startup that raises money, even friends and family or whatever. If you're building a business or bootstrapped, amazing, right? But we're talking just investment at this point. Something like 95% fail in that seed stage. Mm-hmm. And you would think once they're capitalized, it gets better. Yeah. But even down to Series D, 72% failure rate. Failure based on would they have been better off putting their money in the stock market? So yeah, the companies stay around longer, they have more runway, they have the time to figure stuff out, but really in that time, the rate of return is going down unless you're growing. So what ends up happening is startup founders and venture capitalists, those big successes really need to be very tightly aligned. Mm-hmm. And even if they're slightly divergent, it'll get really far apart as the company grows.
Gotcha. Well, this isn't a fundraising podcast here today, so we should probably change topics a little bit, but it's all relevant. So when we look at Axiom, where do you consider Axiom is accelerating very quickly here and doing very well, and where are there still some items that you need to sort of burn down risk and still some big alligators that are going to have to be fought off here in the near term?
Sure. So I invested in Axiom 5 years ago. I was still at Google. I actually remember it was like March of 2020. It was right after, it was right after COVID lockdown. And I had invested in Axiom. Axiom's 8 years old. So at this point, they were about 3 years old. I had invested when Axiom won this award called the CD-ISS contract. It gives Axiom the exclusive right to connect its modules to the ISS. So a commercial infrastructure connecting to the ISS. Mm-hmm. So my thought process was that's one major de-risking, like a regulatory de-risking. I'd met the founders. That was also a major de-risking, right? You got Dr. Cam Ghaffarian, billionaire, multi-time founder, multiple unicorns. You've got Mike Suffredini, the program manager of the ISS, and you've got this great team. So founder market fit was there for me. The regulatory moat, that was the kicker for me, which was like, okay, the ISS, this lab that we've all built with our taxpayer money, the largest product built by humanity, $150 billion put in, 15 countries, $5 billion a year, that's a lot of value. Mm-hmm. And this small startup has the ultimate beachhead to sophisticate the business model. And that's where I think we should talk about, because that's I think the big learning. Yeah. That's when I put my money in. Then about a year later, I joined as chief revenue officer, and the other areas where I felt we need to de-risk is market lock-in, but really first is there demand for this market for commercial space stations? And by the way, if you took all the business, that $5 billion a year I was talking about from the ISS, and just put it straight to a commercial space station, awesome. That's an incredible business. That's not a venture business. That doesn't create the math that I'm talking about. Axiom has raised about $700 million to date. We've done about $1.3 billion in revenue, so I did monetize it a little bit in the 4 years. That's not enough. When you raise that much money, again, remember the venture math. Your investors are choosing to put money in this high-risk bet because it's going to make them more money over time than if they just put it in the stock market. So if you're raising $1 billion, you've chosen your destiny to be one of the top 5 companies in the world, that $1 trillion market cap. Mm-hmm. Microsoft, NVIDIA, Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, and these are now $3-4 trillion market cap. So the bar is much higher. So investors are looking for that. So the market lock-in was, okay, is there more demand than there is supply? Supply just being the ISS and I guess the Chinese station now. Is there more demand? And I can unequivocally tell you there's far more demand than there is supply. We've done 4 missions now, AX1 through 4. These are what we call our precursor missions. We fly our customers to the ISS in anticipation of Axiom segment attaching to the ISS. We've sent about a dozen countries across these 4 missions, and we have, I won't even call it a pipeline, a backlog of contracts for the next 4 missions.
Okay.
We have nowhere to send them. Right, there's not enough launch opportunities, the station won't be around. So we've proven that the demand is definitely there. Second part of it is making sure you have the supply. Right, station is coming down. So what's gonna happen after that? So the de-risking there is founders, which I told you about, regulatory advantage, asymmetric advantage, which is why I put my money in, locking in the market, which is what I've been doing for the last 3.8 years. And now as CEO is making sure that we have a capacity problem. We're building the supply to meet that demand.
Is there enough support for humans in low Earth orbit, or do you see that wavering in this country and around the world? Do you think that's growing, or do you think that that's wavering?
What do you mean by support?
For having humans as a constant presence in space, and is that needed?
How many people in the room, if I told you right now, I'm the guy who's selling tickets to the station. If I told you I've got one for you right now, you got to go outside, get on a helicopter, we'll take you to the launch pad. How many people you would go right now?
Not many.
No, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. I would guess 27% of the room,
Oh, it's higher than that at this room.
30%, 34.3%. And these aren't made up numbers. I actually track all this.
Yeah.
I'll look at this picture after and I'll count. For 4 years, I've been doing the same question. And what I've seen is, people who put your hands up, put them up again? All of you raised your hands before your heart even skipped the next beat. Before your heart took its next beat. Hopefully it didn't skip a beat, and if you have a measurable, check. But you all did it without thinking. There was something instinctual in you. Now the rest of you are probably thinking we're crazy. This room is probably a little more skewed. You go to, I give talks all over the world. I think it's about a third of people.
Okay.
And I just assumed it was everyone. And then some people are like, I never even thought about it. Who in this room has never thought about going to space? Okay, so this is a little bit of a skewed room. Like in a normal room, and I don't mean to, normal's a loaded word, but in the outside world, about a third of people have never thought about going to space, even with all the news and everything, and that blows my mind. I haven't thought about anything else, except for maybe when I was a teenager, than space, since I was 3 years old, since the moment it connected. So that kind of passion, and that's, I find it, it might be genetic, but to your question about support, I think that's not going away. Okay. Right, so a lot of times in the fundraising discussions, and some contrarians will say, why do we need humans in space? We can send robots, we can send satellites, we can do whatever. It's not a question of need. It's not even a question of want. We will be a multiplanetary species. And 2/3 of us might not want that. 1/3 of us might be fighting against it, but 1/3 of us just know it. Not even know it. It's, I often quote a friend of mine, Steve Wolf. He wrote a book called The Obligation. And the premise of it is, why do bees go from flower to flower? Don't think about it. It's just who they are. So for those of us who believe, for those of us who know that this is going to be the future, it's not even a question. Now, just to give you a real answer.
No, that's a real answer.
The support across the world, I've spent the last 4 years, and if we had met 4 years and 3 days ago, there's no way I could have even imagined myself saying these words. I've spent the last 4 years in the rooms where most people aren't, with world leaders, prime minister, president level, minister of defense, minister of economy, minister of education. Those rooms are sometimes real rooms, like, behind the scenes. Often they're WhatsApp rooms. This entire business is done on WhatsApp. But I have firsthand knowledge of why governments, why nations go to space, why they spend money the way they do, why deals can be done in 30 days when experts 4 years ago told me it's a 5 to 10 year sales cycle. because there is beyond support for it. I'm happy to go into it. It's not a secret. I do call it an earned secret that I have because of the unique experience I had. But it's a very clear reason. But yeah, that support is, that train's left the building. Like, something will happen in the next 5 years. It's a very trite statement, but that actually is the fundraising hypothesis that I go out with. Something's gonna happen. 2030 is that moment, and now is the time to invest.
So you're sort of referring to, I'm going to call it, there's a space tourism aspect, but there's also a government astronaut aspect that you folks have been doing very well with. There's probably some other markets as well that you can speak to. So it's not just putting humans up there for tourism and government reasons, national pride. Can you talk to some of the other markets I'm sure that exist as well?
Sure. I'll touch a little bit on the reasons for governance. So we are primarily a human spaceflight company. And a unit of measure that you can look at is the number of astronauts that have gone up. I think the AX4 guys and girls, Peggy, they were 634, 35, like that number. So very few people have gone up. If you look at the last 6 years, well, I guess 60 years ago, we were, collective species, it was two nations, US and the Soviet Union, racing to get one person off the planet. And pretty cool that in 60 plus years, we've sent 600 since. In the last 6 years, and I'm counting all spaceflight in this, the first 3 years, so 2019 to 2022, we're sending about 12 people a year. In the last 3 years, we sent 48 people. And so we've quadrupled the number of people per year going. Axiom's responsible for 16 of those. What happens when the vehicles start getting larger? And Clay and I were just talking about, what the science behind it, but when a Starship goes up and takes 70 people, 100 people, one flight will 10x the number of people that go up a year. And what do we do? What do they do when they go up there? So on the human part, I just think that's just a huge market. And as that grows, all these other markets come out of it. So I'm going to start at a complete opposite, and some people will often say defense, right? And Space Force and Guardians going up. I don't know if there's really a need to be sending Guardians up right now, or if the governments are even thinking that from all the conversations I've had. But once more humans go up, once more commerce goes up, just like the Navy formed to protect our commerce, our ships from the United States, from pirates, similar things are going to happen. So that's a complete extreme example. But to support life, just to keep life, going, I mean, data centers, right? AI, cloud computing, those are fundamental elements that are necessary to put up anything in space. So I think data and communications, orbital data centers, I think that's already a market. Pharmaceuticals, all the research that has been done, biomedical research, health that's been done over the last several decades on the ISS. What we're seeing with our 4 missions is an acceleration of commercialization. So the first cancer drug that was tested on AX3 went to clinical trials on Earth, FDA approved, and they tested again, experimented again on organoids, tumor organoids, on AX4. This is with UCSD. And between the data centers and the pharmaceuticals, we're already seeing real-world commercialization. So those 2 markets, I think, for sure, are here. And then the third would be advanced manufacturing. I think the business case is still yet to be proven, but I think the science is definitely proven, and the unit economics are almost there.
Very helpful. Now, Axiom's a member of CSF, along with 3 or 4 other players in the commercial LEO sort of destination market. And while I love all of my children equally, why is Axiom sort of better positioned than those folks? What's your unique value prop? Why do you think you folks are in a better position going forward?
So, I think the key here is going back to what I said, that regulatory advantage. Right now, the space station market, and particularly the narrative that's coming out of the US for it, is very much about a post-ISS solution, which is great. We absolutely need to think about that. You know what happens when you focus on post-ISS? You get post-ISS, right? Everyone is focusing on this proposal that's coming out, where we need to be focusing on the plan right now. What's the bridge? How are we going to get from the ISS? How are we going to make sure we secure this value? And by the way, the rest of the world is talking about this. We seem to be the only ones that are fighting each other to get to this crappy contract that may or may not come out. But what matters is right here, right now. Right, so we know the ISS is coming down. We know there's a lot of value in there. We know budgets are being cut. We know other budgets are going up around the world. And we know there's a gigantic vacuum of leadership right now. And people are waking up. It's kind of the kick in the pants that the world needed. It's like, oh man, we're almost out of time. So I love our children all equally as well. Anyone here firstborn with younger siblings? Yeah, I'm second. We know that parents love the first one more. That's why I only had one. I didn't want any of my children to feel how I felt. No, I love my parents and my sister very much. But the first one is extremely important for a couple of reasons. One is building that bridge. And we might have plans and visions of what the world is going to look like 2030. I don't know. I've also learned that I'm probably not the visionary I'd like to believe I am. But I know how to use vision as a tool to create very important deals, right? Like AX4. Yeah. 3 countries that have never been to the ISS before, right? It is a moment for the world that just shows we're in a different chapter of humanity right now. What's going to happen over the next couple of years, though, is we need to find a solution, and we are that solution. So that's where the difference is.
And in our last sort of minute here, when I hear you talk about how big of a market you think there is going to be and in the very near future, it sort of sounds to me, Tej, like you're talking about, when you say $1 trillion marketplace, you think this is sort of another .com
very much so.
Coming.
And by the way, it was 4 years ago here, I was on a panel and someone gave me a nickname. They called me $1 Trillion Tej. Because I made a similar comment. I was new to the industry and people were talking, it was a venture capital panel, and I was kind of like, what are you guys talking about? Like, venture capital is not going to change. Space doesn't have to change. You're selling to investors, right? Figure out a business model that may fail, but you're going to try, and if we're right, we win. And I started to get like snickers, like $1 trillion, ha ha ha, and I'm like, what do you think it needs to be? Oh, these reports came out in 2040 that it's going to be $1 trillion market. I'm like, at the time, NVIDIA maybe had just hit $1 trillion or something, or Apple had just hit $1 trillion. They're at 3 or 4 trillion at one company. So if we think the entire space market is smaller than the value of one company's market cap, we got a problem. Like, space is awesome. I love it. I told you I've been dreaming about it. But as a business person who put my own money in, right? Like, we need to be bigger. Now, with that said, I think it's much bigger. I think this is the biggest technical revolution, societal revolution, diplomatic revolution of human history. So the pattern I see, I went to college 96 to 2000. I say, you talked about the .com era. I feel like I got the tail end of the boom and viscerally felt the bust. This feels like 1995, the internet. Imagine if in 1995 you knew what was coming, not just with advertising, but ad auction places, what made Google great. Came with what was coming from e-commerce, what happened with cloud, what happened with mobile, what's happening with AI. Imagine you knew that was the next 30 years. First of all, there's no way you could predict it in 95. And if you did, people would think you were crazy. And those people became super wealthy because they were right. That's where we are with space. And all of us have been working on this for a very long time. Like, this is that inflection point. So the first big learning for me when I came into the industry is like, wow, I get a second chance. And I'm not a kid anymore. I'm just a kid with gray hair. This is that moment. Second thing I learned very quickly when I got into this industry is while we have 30 years of knowledge since 1995 that we can apply to the space industry, the space business model is still stuck in 1965. Okay. We're still I'm willing to bet everyone's going to be talking about cost per kilogram and how it's come down and the bars come down. No, it's still crazy expensive for a startup founder to go to space. If you're starting your app right now in the AI world or the cloud world or tech world, it's not only free. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft will pay you $100,000 so you build your app on their platform. That's where space has to get to. And by the way, we're there. We can make it so the barrier to entry is so low for new startup founders, all of you who raised your hands, that before you even have to go think about raising money, you can test the hell out of your product in space and know if it's a hit or not, tweak it as you need, and then work with your investors to fund it and scale it.
Well, this gets me amped up. I'm obviously responsible for doing a lot of advocacy in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the commercial space industry, and I think I can take a lot of what you've been talking about here today and get folks excited. So we're a little bit over time here, but let me ask you one final question. So you can't include Axiom, this question. Our microphones are dying. This is them playing us off stage, but in closing, you had $1 million to invest in space now, and it can't be Axiom. Where would you put that money today?
Okay, so I've been advised by my comms team to just answer the question that you want to answer, so I would invest in Axiom. Another, I think, interesting bet, which I did invest money in, is SpaceX. I invested when the valuation was $72 billion, and I thought I was crazy. But I just wanted to be part of it, right? Like it was, and now they're going out at $400 billion, right? So it probably is a safe bet. I'm just going to throw Axiom in there again, then I'll answer your question. Space, again, just like the internet, maybe 30 years behind, will have multiple of these value-generating engines, SpaceX being one of them, and it's time for the next few, and I think Axiom is the next one. But to answer your question, what I would do, I think I'd go pretty heavy on orbital data centers.
Yeah. Star Cloud, something like that.
Say again?
Star Cloud.
I haven't done too much homework on individual companies, but it's very clear to me that that market is here. Axiom alone has hundreds of millions of dollars of backlog for orbital data services.
Okay.
Now, we have our own orbital data service, our platform, but our customers are the ones that are looking at this as their national security needs or whatever. And it's not coming from new budgets. It's coming from cloud budgets. So I think that's where I'd put my money.
Awesome. That'll have to be the last word. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in thanking Tejpaul Bhatia.